All right, so we're diving deep today into something that's honestly kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah,
The,
definitely.
the 4B movement.
Okay.
And it's a movement that's really, it's got a lot of people talking.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a whole stack of articles here.
Yeah.
Personal stories, global comparisons, really trying to understand
Right.
where did this thing come from? What does it all mean? Where is it going?
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting about this movement is that it's not just like a
Yeah.
slogan or a hashtag.
Yeah.
It's becoming a lifestyle choice for some women.
Yeah. And it's a powerful one.
Yeah.
I mean, 4B, no marriage, no childbirth, no dating,
Right.
and no sex with men.
Right.
Like, whoa.
Yeah, and that might sound pretty radical to some people.
Yeah.
But when you actually dig into these sources,
Yeah.
you start to see just
Yeah.
how deeply rooted it is
Yeah.
in issues of gender inequality,
Exactly.
societal pressures,
Yeah.
and just a growing sense of like frustration and disillusionment among women.
Yeah, so let's break it down a little bit.
Okay.
Let's start with like the origin story.
Sure.
The 4B movement.
Mm-hmm.
This actually started in South Korea
Right.
in like the mid to late 2010s.
Yeah, in the mid to late 2010s.
Right.
And I think to really understand how it emerged,
Mhm.
you have to look at the context
Yeah.
of South Korean society at the time.
Right.
And these sources really point to this deep-seated gender inequality as like a major catalyst.
Okay.
Like, for example, did you know that in South Korea, women are paid approximately 1/3 less than men,
Wow.
according to the OECD?
1/3. That's a huge.
It's a massive gap.
Yeah.
And that
yeah.
economic disparity,
Right.
along with like
Mhm.
cultural expectations around marriage and motherhood,
Yeah.
just created this climate where a lot of women felt really trapped,
Right.
disillusioned.
Yeah.
And then you have the added tragedy of 2016, where a woman was murdered
Yeah.
in a Seoul train station toilet by a man.
That's right.
And that really fueled the movement.
Yeah. I mean, that's.
It brought to light
Mhm.
the very real danger
Right.
that women face, and it really intensified those calls for change.
And it makes sense.
Yeah.
That women would start pushing back against these norms that are so deeply ingrained in the culture.
Right.
So how did this movement that started in South Korea, how did it gain traction in the U.S.?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Our sources showed this surge in Google searches for 4B in the U.S., particularly after Trump's 2016 election victory.
Oh, wow.
Remember, this was a time when a lot of women were feeling deeply disillusioned, angry.
And not even just about losing the election.
Yeah, exactly. It was about something much deeper. It was about this sense of betrayal, this lack of respect. And we see that reflected in quotes like this one from Ashley Pollard, who decided to join the movement. She said, "We're upset that women will always be criticized.
Wow.
No matter what. Meanwhile, a rapist will still be president."
That's heavy.
It is, and it speaks to this larger issue of hypocrisy that I think a lot of women are grappling with.
Right. It's like this feeling that men want to have their cake and eat it too, right?
Absolutely.
Sex, but they don't want to give women the right to choose when it comes to abortion.
It's about control. It's about power.
That double standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it goes beyond individual men. It's like a systemic thing.
It is. It's a system that prioritizes men's desires over women's autonomy.
Okay.
And we see this reflected in Michaela Thomas's story.
Yeah.
This 21-year-old artist from Georgia. She says, "Young men expect sex, but they also want us to not be able to have access to abortion.
Wow.
They can't have both."
Right.
And I think it's powerful.
These young women see a direct link between their personal choices and the larger political landscape.
And then the fact that so many men voted for Trump despite all the allegations of sexual abuse. And especially when you consider that their wives and girlfriends voting for Kamala Harris. I mean, it
just highlights this disconnect between words and action. And how that can contribute to this feeling of distrust and disillusionment.
Yeah, totally.
It's like, it's not just about politics.
Right. It's bigger than that.
It's about something much deeper.
Okay.
This frustration with how women are treated in society as a whole.
Yeah. And speaking of reclaiming control, one thing that's really interesting is that this whole movement has sparked concern among some governments.
That's right.
Particularly in South Korea.
About declining birth rates.
Absolutely. South Korea already has one of the lowest birth rates in the world.
Okay.
And the government sees it as a potential crisis.
Right.
But from the perspective of women in the 4B movement, it's not about just refusing to have children.
Yeah.
It's about making a conscious choice based on their own circumstances and desires.
Right.
They're rejecting this idea that their primary role in society is to be baby-making machines.
Yeah, it's about pushing back against those expectations.
Exactly.
And saying, we have the right to decide what our lives look like.
And that right to choose extends to
Right.
all aspects of their lives.
Yeah, and it seems like from these sources, women involved in the movement are serious about their stance.
Yeah.
They're not just going to drop it.
Right.
Until they see real change.
Especially when it comes to abortion rights.
Especially with abortion rights.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a level of commitment here.
Absolutely. There's a conviction that goes beyond just fleeting frustration. It's like this deep-seated belief that fundamental change is needed.
And they're willing to make sacrifices to get there.
Right. They're willing to put their foot down and say, this is what we want.
So could this movement, despite how radical it might seem to some, spark these broader conversations about gender roles, societal expectations?
Absolutely. It's forcing us to...
Individual autonomy. Could this be like a catalyst?
I think it could be.
For real, lasting change.
It's hard to predict with certainty, but I think it's definitely a possibility.
So to kind of further explore those global implications, we need to look beyond South Korea and the U.S.
Right.
Because believe it or not, similar movements are popping up in other parts of the world.
Yeah, we're seeing that.
Like in China.
Especially in China with the rise of the 6B4T movement.
Okay, so tell me about the 6B4T movement.
So it's essentially like an expansion of the 4B movement, adding 2 more principles to the mix.
Interesting.
Rejecting consumerism and fostering mutual aid among unmarried women.
So it's taking those core ideas of 4B, that rejection of traditional expectations, and then adding this layer of social and economic resistance.
You could say that it's about creating these alternative systems of support and community outside of those traditional structures of marriage and family.
Right.
And it's also about challenging the capitalist structures that often perpetuate gender inequality.
Yeah, it's like a whole paradigm shift.
It is. And I think that even though these movements, like 4B, might seem radical to some, the sources really suggest that they're tapping into this deeper dissatisfaction with the way things are, with the status quo.
Yeah, and we see that.
And we see it in the stories of women like Abby Kay, who faced this intense backlash after publicly announcing her decision to embrace the 4B lifestyle.
Wow. What happened?
I mean, we're talking death threats.
Seriously.
Hate comments.
That's awful.
It's a stark reminder that challenging societal norms can come with a heavy price.
Yeah, it's really disheartening to hear that.
Yeah.
But it also kind of shows how much conviction these women have.
Absolutely. They're willing to stand their ground, even when faced with such adversity.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so compelling about this movement. It's not just complaining
it's not just
or voicing dissent.
Talking about it. It's taking action. It's about making choices that align with their values. Even if it means going against the grain.
It's bold. And I think, maybe not everyone agrees with the 4B movement's approach, but it's definitely raising these important questions.
Oh, absolutely. It's forcing us to.
Right. About gender roles,
confront
societal expectations, like what does it even mean to live a fulfilling life?
Yeah, it's challenging us to.
And it makes us confront some uncomfortable truths. About how women are marginalized.
Absolutely.
Disadvantaged.
It's about examining our own biases and assumptions and considering alternative ways of living.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What are the long-term impacts of this movement?
Well, it's tough to say for sure.
Yeah.
But one thing's clear.
Okay.
The 4B movement has started a conversation that we can't ignore. A conversation that's long overdue.
Yeah.
And while there's no easy answers,
right,
the fact that we're having this dialogue is a sign of progress in itself.
It's a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And whether or not you agree with the Fourian movement, the issues it raises are important for everyone.
Absolutely. We all have a stake in creating a society that's more equitable, just, and respectful of individual autonomy.
Well said. I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners.
Yeah, I think so too.
So thanks for guiding us through this deep dive.
Of course, it's been a pleasure.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah, me too.